And we're live. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Two Abdullahs. This is a special series that we're doing that's coming to an end, soon to come to an end. Maybe this will be the last episode. And this is, of course, the Epileptic Prophet. So if you've missed out on the first 5 parts, you might want to go back and check them out. Each part is an independent discussion on specific issues in Muhammad's life that reflect what was going on in his brain. And to be frank, this is one of the most powerful explanations that lets you understand from a secular perspective or from an agnostic perspective what is the best way to explain his behavior, what was going on in his head. So if you're new here, welcome. Do join us for the next 2 hours. We're going to be going through some really interesting stuff there. And over to you, Abdullah Gondal, for part 6.
Hello and welcome back to Epileptic Prophet part 6 of this series. Hopefully this might be the last episode. We'll go through a lot of very, very interesting things. A quick overview of what we're going to go through today. We're going to cover a section over Muhammad's delusions, his weird delusions where he'd be seeing angels running around and people flying in the sky and whatnot. Then we'll cover the million-dollar question regarding Quran and hypergraphia. How did Muhammad create the Quran? Is the Quran a product of his epilepsy? Did that contribute to him creating the Quran? Was epilepsy causing him compulsive rhyming, and so on and so forth? We'll go over his violence, how people who suffer from temporal epilepsy start soliciting violence, have a violent nature, get irritated if they're challenged. We're also then going to go over a very, very important issue, is OCD, which is going to be very eye-opening. And then we have what was shocking to me, and this over the last week, I added a lot more points to this section, the famous cases section. We're going to go over about 40 famous cases ranging from sitting politicians to chief justices. Then there are some ex-presidents of the world's leading superpowers. There's artists, famous musicians, authors. And honestly, your view about what mental illness is will drastically change by the end of this episode. And then we're going to also then refute a epilepsy paper written by Dr. Hassan Aziz regarding Muhammad not being epileptic. We'll point out the critical lies in that paper or points that completely defeat his own argument. And then we'll get to some miscellaneous points and then the conclusion. And we might be taking calls during this episode. And after, we're going to also probably have a discussion period depending on how much time we've left. And if you guys want, we might have a separate episode after this where we just sit down and discuss all the weird things we noticed in this series, different things that connect, like some things you mentioned in part 1 may tie into something in part 6 and so on and so forth. But yeah, with that aside, let's get into it. So we're going to start off with Dr. Ali Sina explaining what narcissism is and how Muhammad was narcissistic. This is going to be a 6-minute clip, but pay attention. He brings out some really, really interesting points. And then after he's done, I'll point out some things that he might have missed out and that might help you connect the dots. Let's get to it.
Narcissism is a personality disorder that revolves around a pattern of grandiosity, need of admiration, and sense of entitlement. Often individuals feel overly important and will exaggerate achievement and will accept and often demand praise and admiration despite worthy achievements. To some extent, we are all narcissists. It helps us to have a positive self-esteem about ourselves and a positive outlook at the world.
That's why self-confidence.
It gives us self-confidence. So without it, you will have a low self-esteem and other disorders can appear. So that's why it is very important to understand what is malignant narcissism, because a little bit narcissism we all have and we must all have. That's a positive narcissism. Malignant narcissism is a disorder. It's like blood pressure. We all should have blood pressure, but when it becomes excessive, it becomes a disorder, a disease.
Disease.
There are 9 characteristics that have been defined as what a person should have to be narcissist. If 5 of them falls into that category, if you have 5 of those characteristics, then you are diagnosed as a narcissist, as a malignant narcissist. Here, let me read you these 9. He feels grandiose and self-important, such as exaggerate his achievements and his importance, and even lies about what he has done and his powers and things like that. Number 2 is obsessed with fantasies of unlimited success, fame, fearsome power, or omnipotence, unequal brilliance, etc. Number 3 is firmly convinced that he or she is unique. Number 4 requires excessive adulation, attention, and affirmation. Or failing that, he wants to be feared. Number 5 feels entitled, expects unreasonable or special and favorable priority treatment, demands automatic and full obedience without providing any evidence for his authority. Number 6 is interpersonally exploitative, uses others, manipulates others for his own end. Number 7 is devoid of empathy, is unable and unwilling to identify or acknowledge that other people have feelings and have needs. Number 8 is constantly envious of others, while at the same time he thinks that others are envious of him. And number 9 is arrogant, has haughty behavior. All these characteristics I discovered that define Muhammad perfectly. You need only 5 of them to be malignant, to be diagnosed as a malignant narcissist. Muhammad had all 9 of them. Verse 40, chapter 33. He says, he claimed that he is anointed messenger of God and a sealed prophet. Well, that's what we know already about that. He refused to provide any evidence for that claim. There is no evidence that he said, trying to explain. He expected people to accept what he said. And if he didn't, he would wage war of them or kill them. That attitude, the claim itself is not narcissistic, but the attitude, providing no evidence for your claim and expecting others to accept. And if they don't accept, they must be killed because they are worthless creatures. That attitude is narcissism. Verse 21, chapter 33. He calls himself Khairul Khalq, the best of creation.
Right.
Verse 253, chapter 2. He calls himself exalted above all prophets in degrees, superior to Jesus, all of the prophets prior to him, in degrees. In chapter 17, verse 55, he calls himself the preferred one. And in chapter 21, verse 107, he claims to be the mercy of God on all mankind. Now, if you study the life of Muhammad, and you see how ruthlessly he exterminated people whom he raided, he didn't even give them a chance to defend themselves. He went in the middle of the night and attacked them when they were asleep. They were not prepared, and brutally killed them, and then looted everything they had, and took their wives and children and raped them, and allowed his men to rape them. He says, they are your right-hand possessions. It's also in the Quran. You don't find any mercy in the actions of Muhammad. And at the same time, despite lack of achievements here, despite worthy achievements, he has these high praises about himself.
All right. So that was quite a lot. And he brought up some really interesting points. And he said that Muhammad displayed signs of narcissism. And he said that everybody is a little narcissistic just from a evolutionary perspective to protect yourself, But Muhammad did have narcissism. And some things that pop into my mind that are part of the Islamic faith that he might not have pointed out to you guys in that video. For example, saying peace be upon him or sallallahu alaihi wasallam every time you hear his name. This was in fact a thing that was repetitively instilled in my mind in the mosque in Pakistan over and over again. In fact, it's a bad thing and very disrespectful if you hear Muhammad's name and you don't say that. Muhammad returns your salam even if he's passed away. He returns your salam if you send him durood. This weird debate that leads to between these Barelvis and Salafis, where if Muhammad is alive in his grave or not. Then Muhammad led all the prophets in prayer in Jerusalem. Blasphemy killings, the idea in itself that Muhammad's the chosen one. He's the best example for all mankind to follow. In Surah 33, verse 21. Khairul Khalq, like he said in Surah Noon, or right after he gets accused that he's crazy, the next verse, no, you're the best of creation. He then says that he's a seal of the prophets, like he's the last one. And then he's like, he uses his authority to exploit others, like all the time for his ideology. He believes like if you don't listen to Muhammad, you burn in hell, right? And then the whole idea of the surah like it, where my book is so amazing that you can't even bring 3 lines like it, traces its origin from Muhammad's narcissistic perception of his own ideology. But with that in mind, these are some really interesting points that come up when you think about how Muhammad's narcissism was. With that aside, we will start moving on to the next slide.
Just to show an example of what he is talking about. This is a hadith that talks about one of those night raids. So there's a bunch of them, right? This is one that they attacked Hawazin with Abu Bakr during the time of the Prophet. They arrived in an oasis belonging to Bani Fazara. During the last part of the night, we attacked at dawn, raiding the people of the oasis and killed them 9 or 7 households. So this was a common practice that they used to do. Anyhow,
night raids, and I mean another thing was there's a hadith just like this where Muhammad's men would attack and kill kids and women.
Yes.
And a Sahabi asks, and Muhammad says explicitly at their children, so their blood's okay.
Exactly.
So they're kind of collateral damage. But yeah, that's interesting as well. But anyways, we're gonna get back to the slides now. We're gonna keep that narcissism point in mind because it's gonna pop up again and again as we go on, but we're going to come back to the slides, to his delusions, because we're in the delusion section where we last left off. So we learned that Muhammad had his chest open quite a few times. First was when he was a child. They're suspecting this happened a couple of times with his foster mother, and that's the whole reason they returned him, thinking he's afflicted with insanity or demon-possessed or something. Then it happened at the age of 10. Then it happened in the cave of Hira, the first revelation, or the day before it. And then it happened when he went up to heaven to see Allah, the Miraj. So yeah, here we see on the hadith where I was in at the house between sleeping and being awake. So he's kind of semi-asleep. I heard somebody saying, the one in the middle of the 3, I was brought a vessel of gold containing Zamzam water. So my chest was split to here. Qatada said, what does that mean? He said to the lowest part of his stomach. So my heart was removed and washed with Zamzam water. And the point is, like, why is this repeating? Why does Allah need to keep washing it, keep opening it, keep washing it? Like, do it once, man. Like, what kind of surgeon are you that you have to keep doing patch jobs after your first bad surgery, right? Like, it doesn't make sense for Allah to keep doing this again and again. It makes more sense, like Dr. Didek described in the beginning in part 1 we saw. This is actually a precursor, an aura to a seizure. It's epigastric rising and accompanied with visceral pain. And Muhammad just thinks that he's been cut open by angels. But yeah, this hallucination repeats itself quite a few times. Just another one here. Moving on to the next slide. And we have a green screen covering the horizon. So this is interesting because colors is actually a case later on in the cases we'll see where a patient sees flashes of green color covering everywhere, whichever he looked. And that's interesting that Muhammad saw the green screen covering the horizon. It's kind of also funny, or if you have a green screen, you can do these special effects in the sky. So Allah was just showing him, this is all just green screen, bro. It's not real.
It's Islam predicted green screens, bro.
All right, let's go to the next one. The next slide is pretty interesting. So this one is about the seal of the prophet on the back of Muhammad, a mole, a red tumor. That was actually between his shoulder blades and stuff. And Muhammad thought that this was somehow a sign of God. And that's what I'm trying to get to here. The delusional, the narcissistic idea that his bodily defects are being worshipped and adored by his followers. Now let's see what it actually was. In the left side, we're going to start Sayyid al-Khudri about the seal of the prophet. It was a protrusion of skin on his back. Then the next one underneath him says, it was between his shoulders, and it was like a zir al-hajja, meaning the button of a small tent or the egg of a partridge. Then the next one says, it was between his shoulders, but it was fleshy and red, resembling the egg of a pigeon. Another one says it was the size of a pigeon's egg. So Muhammad is a tumor on the back, a growth on his back between his shoulder blades. And it was a cluster surrounded by till moles, which appeared to be like a wart. So Muhammad has got a deformity, and people started perceiving it as something divine. Now go back to part 1 when Dr. Ramachandran was telling us that temporal epilepsy will cause everything you have to take on a religious weird meaning. It makes no sense for God to give you a seal of prophethood or a weird lesion or these kind of deformities. I mean, this is a pretty extreme case of them. I'm pretty sure it's nothing like that, but it's funny that actually I've also seen cases where in India, right, kids born with weird anomalies or numerous fingers or more fingers or hands, they start getting worshipped as gods, whereas this is just genetic mutations and stuff, right? But it's interesting how people who are ignorant can interpret just bodily defects as some divine underlying reason, which makes no sense. And that just alludes to their delusional thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The next step is the slide, which we have, is going to get a little gross. So giving you guys a heads up, the holy spittle. What am I talking about? So as weird as Muhammad was, in his twisted mind, sometimes he would tell his people that if they rub his spit and his used water on their faces and chest, it will give them glad tidings or blessings. And so we're going to just kind of read this. And this is just to affirm the guy was weird, it's this culty, he's delusional about his own bodily fluids at this point. And he's attaching divine blessings to bodily excrement, which just makes no sense. So here we have, I was in the company of the Messenger of Allah, and he was sitting in a place between Mecca and Medina, and Bilal was there. And a desert Arab came to him and said, Muhammad, fulfill your promise that you made with me. So Allah's messenger said to him, accept glad tidings. Thereupon the desert Arab said, you shower glad tidings upon me very much. Then Allah's messenger turned towards Abu Musa and Bilal, seemingly in a state of annoyance, and said, verily, he has rejected glad tidings, but you two should accept them. We said, we have readily accepted them. Then Allah's messenger called for a cup of water and washed his hands in that and face too, and put the saliva in it, and then said, drink out of it and pour it over your faces and over your chest and gladden yourselves. They took a hold of the cup and did as Allah's messenger had commanded them to do. Thereupon Salama called from behind the veil, saying, please spare some water for me as well. So these people, it's just disgusting, weird, delusional thinking about your bodily fluids. On the right side, we have the Prophet asked for a tumbler containing water and washed both his hands and face in it, and then threw a mouthful of water in the tumbler and said to both of us, drink from the tumbler and pour some of its water on your faces and chests. So he's spitting in the water. I'm like, okay, now drink it and rub it on your chests. The people are fighting over his used ablution water, and on the right side it says Allah's messenger would spat, the spittle would fall in the hand of one of them, who would rub it on his face and skin. And this is just bizarre kinds of delusional kind of thinking regarding bodily excrements that it's just hard to justify from a logical perspective or even a theological one. Like it's hard to Why would God put blessings in his bodily fluids? Like, what's the point? Right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah, it's interesting in the context of. I mean, we've heard these before, and you've actually pointed out some of these things before. We even got both of us kicked out of a group, a Muslim group, I think. But in context of like what in context of the narcissism, it actually makes sense.
yeah.
It's like I'm special. Like of course I'm special, right? And
Mhm.
the part about the one thing that shows here is how mad he got at this guy. It's like, yeah, I'm giving you blessings, so you better accept it. And the guy's like, listen, like you're giving too much blessings. It's like the guy was getting annoyed with him or whatever. He got mad at the guy. He's like, it's like, well, how dare you reject my blessings? It's seems like he was full of himself. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah. I mean, the next slide is kind of even more gross. I'm seeing the comments here, and they're already talking about it. Some of them have been predicting it. It's the holy urine and poop of Muhammad, and that's just gross. When I came across this, I'm like, oh, this is like what the hell cult, right? So on the left side we have Islam Web. I don't know if you guys can see it clearly, but I'll read it for you. There's a hadith stating that there was a companion who drank the urine or blood of the Prophet. So it says Abdullah took the blood and drank it. It was after cupping of Muhammad. And then Muhammad says in another narration, supplicated to Allah for him not to be touched by the hellfire and wiped his head. And then these kind of scholars think this is an authentic hadith. So a guy drank Muhammad's blood like a vampire sahabi. And this is a sahih hadith according to some. According on the authority of bint Ruqayya, she said the Prophet ﷺ used to urinate in a container and put it under his bed. Once he urinated and put it under his bed, and when he came back and he found the container empty, when he asked the Abyssinian woman called Baraka, who used to serve him, about the urine which was in the container, she told him that she had drunk it. It's from Bayhaqi. In another narration, the Prophet supplicated to Allah Almighty to grant her health. Consequently, she did not suffer from any illness. This is hadith with similar narrations, and he blesses her. So the point is that instead of rebuking them, he after that prays for them to be like saved and be blessed with health, like as if he thinks himself that his bodily fluids do possess some magical healing abilities or something. On the right side, we see another Muslim website, and they talk about the same kind of hadith about where's the bowl, the lady drank the bowl, and then there's another one. And then they go on and on about, the person's grading of the hadith, the type of narrations, and a little bit more on about that. But the point to take away from this is this guy has some weird delusions. Like none of this makes sense. It's hard to justify it theologically unless your theology is so naive and childlike that, I mean, it is from the 7th century. It's absurd. Anybody expressing such ideas is just delusional, so full of himself. But no, these are scholars who've graded them. These are fatwa websites. These are not my fatwas. These are written by scholars. Yeah, and it gets worse. And then there's the next slide.
Before we get to that, I just want to comment on something that kind of sticks out as kind of weird here, which is the bowl of urine. He left it under his bed. Like that's weird. Like, isn't that something you throw out right away? You wouldn't sleep with it under there, right?
From what I know, like in history, most cultures, like in the British area, European cultures, the 400 or 500 years ago, this was actually common to keep bowls because you didn't have the facility to go out at night, and it was kind of hard to in the middle of the night to go out. It's dangerous, so they would keep a bowl for convenience, and then they just empty it out the next morning. But yeah.
Oh, in the morning. Okay. All right.
Right on. So now we're at the next. So this is his holy sweat. So I mean, Prophet would lay down on the leather mat and sweat it, and people would collect the sweat, and then they'd put it in a perfume bottle, and the Prophet would be like, "Oh my God, my sweat is so nice. You guys rub it on your bodies as perfume," and he would smile and pray for them. And I mean, at this point, like it's just weird that the people are also enabling his delusions too, where they're kind of telling him, yeah, we'll do this, and like we're fighting for your spit, and he's like, oh yeah, maybe my spit is holy, is beautiful and stuff. Like this one time he spat and Ali's eye to fix it and all that, and so all sorts of weird.
Also when you have a baby, he took some of the date, chewed it up with the saliva, and put in the baby's mouth.
Yeah. I mean, some of those things are like cultural, like some of them things, those cultural things have like ideas where like passing on antibodies, immunity, sharing these kind of things. I mean, like I read that in the Arab lands back in the day, because it was so dry, people would like give, like, you know how birds take water and give it to their children. It was common back then in certain demographics. But if we read it today that this guy was spouting water in some kid's mouth, it's just weird, right? So we have to keep in mind certain historical contexts when we're discussing these things. But definitely some of these things just don't make sense in any context. And in fact, even those people are like, this is not normal, this is anomalous, even in 7th century Arabia, you know? But anyways, let's move on to the next slide. This one is one of my favorites because the person asked, who informed the prophet about the jinns at the night when they heard the Quran? So he said, your father told me that it was a tree that told the prophet. So there was a tree in the Isnad of the Hadith.
I just want to quickly shout out Zagros Oscan. Apologize if I didn't say a name properly, for the super chat, $20 and $10. Thank you so much for your kind donations. Is there any evidence that could point to Muhammad being manipulated in a really smart way by people who went to extremes by flattering him / drinking, using his bodily fluids? I think that's a really good question.
It is a very interesting question, and a lot of the end part of Muhammad's life around his death and the whole Shia Sunni split is very interesting. When I was reading up on it, like there's hadith in Sunni literature where there was called a big Thursday or some one big day where Muhammad was about to write something to tell people what to do after his death, and then Omar and a couple of people said he's delirious, like he's not in his senses. And Muhammad got mad. No, I'm the prophet. I'm always in my senses. And Abbas was crying. This day was the biggest calamity. And then this other thing was that Muhammad was drinking this medicine and stuff. So again, were those people trying to use him at the end of his life to get what they wanted? I.e., Abu Bakr wanted to, get the successorship via Ali not getting it. There is an argument that could be made in a way.
Shias make this argument all the time. They say that Abu Bakr and Omar and them, they rushed to bury the prophet. While Ali was burying the prophet, they were already, meddling
the next
the politics. Yeah,
exactly.
getting the next leader involved.
An interesting thing is the people's Muhammad married Aisha, Abu Bakr became caliph, right? Then Muhammad married Hafsa, was Omar's daughter, I believe. Then Omar became the second caliph. And Osman married two of Muhammad's daughter. He's the third caliph. And then Ali married Fatima, Muhammad's daughter. He's the fourth caliph. So it's kind of funny where how like the politics, the kind of intermingling ties into that. So I don't know if it was a lot of family dynamics, manipulation going into all of that. It could have been.
I mean, for sure, people converted to Islam because of the benefits, and I mean, we know after the final conquest of Makkah, or before the final conquest of Makkah, Amr ibn al-As and a few other people converted. Khalid bin Walid, I believe, was another one. So there was obviously a political change happening, and people realized that, hey, I want to get on this team.
There's narrations in Ibn Ishaq I was reading where Abu Sufyan, when he went to Muhammad's tent before he came into Mecca, Muhammad literally almost forcefully had him convert. And Abu Sufyan's like, I don't want to, but like he almost said, you want your head chopped off or you want to convert to Islam? That's basically what told him. But yeah, anyways, kind of getting off topic there. Let's get back to it. So yeah, the tree. So wait, there was a genie, and then the tree saw the genie, and then the tree told Muhammad that there's a genie here hearing the Quran. And then Muhammad told us that this is what happened. That makes no sense. Like I was talking to trees already right from the get-go, from his first revelation. There's talking rocks. So it's kind of that these things stick for them, right? Like it doesn't go away. But anyways, next slide we're going to go to is talking cows and wolves. I'm just going to quickly read that.
So we're done with the narcissism now?
Oh, it might pop up once in a while, but this is kind of like delusional narcissistic section here. Here he talks about people that talking cow, and then there's a talking what else? Talking wolf as well, and then Omar and Abu Bakr believe in the existence of this talking wolf and cow, and it's a weird hadith. We're gonna go through the section a little faster because it's just gonna be Muhammad just being just being stupid and bizarre and just psychotic or having a psychosis and whatnot. Let's get to the next hadith. Here we have another one where he says, the Prophet came to us and said, and some nations were displayed before me. So he looks at the sky and he's having this weird holographic show displayed. A prophet would pass in front of me with one man, and another with two men, and another with a group of people, and another with nobody with him. Then I saw a great crowd covering the horizon, and I wished that they were my followers. But it was said to me, this is Moses. Then it was said to me, look, I looked and I saw a big gathering with a large number of people covering the horizon, like he saw Gabriel covering the horizon initially. It was said, look this way and that way. And so I saw a big crowd covering the horizon. So he's looking everywhere and he's seeing a crowd cover the horizon, like Gabriel was wherever he was looking as well. And he was also covering the whole horizon. And this is mentioned in multiple narrations. But yeah, interesting. Like he sees these people and like what is going on here? Thousands of people, 70,000 people in the sky, some weird holographic movie for him being but anyways, let's go to the next slide. We have 342, and we have here Muhammad is hanging out with Gabriel, who hears a voice, and another angel arrives. Muhammad receives his revelation during the episode. So here we have Muhammad is kind of hanging out, and he heard a creaking sound above him, and a gate opened in heaven. An angel came down to him, and 2 lights have been given to you. And then this weird revelation kind of thing story comes up. Anyways, then we have another slide. And next slide is 343. Muhammad runs back ecstatically and reports his most recent auditory visual disturbance of hearing Allah boast about him and his followers to the angels through a gate opened in heaven. So we performed the Maghrib prayer, and those who stayed. Then the Messenger of Allah came back in a hurry, out of breath, with his garment pulled up to his knees, and said, be of good cheer, for your Lord has opened one of the gates of heaven and is boasting of you before the angels, saying, look at my slaves, they have fulfilled one obligatory duty and are awaiting another. What I'm trying to get to here is try to project this and how this guy is. He runs up into a mosque with his things pulled up to his knees and he's out of breath, panting. And he tells you, hey guys, an angel came to me and told me that God opened a gate in heaven and was like cheering about you guys being nice people. It's straight up like schizo, crazy, somebody going through psychosis. That's how they sound like. That's exactly how they would sound like. Next slide, we'll go to 344. Here, Muhammad said that he saw one of his friends, Jafar, flying in the paradise with the angel. Like, dude, like this is like Peter Pan and Tinkerbell going flying to Neverland or something like. Like it gets ridiculous. Like, where was this guy's head? An animal was brought to the Messenger of Allah while he was going with the funeral. He refused to ride on it. When the funeral was away, the animal was brought to him and he rode on it. He was asked about it. He said, the angels were on their feet. I was not to ride while they were walking. When they went away, I rode. It makes no sense. This is so bizarre. Angels do they have feet? Do they walk? I thought they had 600 wings and they flew around and they could take their shape shift. Like, what are you talking about? None of this makes sense. And like Dr. Ramachandran was saying, all of their weird behaviors start taking a bizarre underlying meaning that is religious, which has no connection to reality. And they like use these weird confabulations to explain their behaviors away. It just makes no sense.
Can you just I just want to read that one more time. Like, this is so weird. An animal was brought to him. He refused to ride it. And then when the funeral was gone, he rode it and he said, the angels were on their feet, so I was not to ride while they were walking. So is this now a religious ruling that you can't drive a car near the funerals because you're going to run over the angel's feet or something? No. I mean, okay, that's being silly. But like, seriously, you can't drive. I mean, driving is like going on a camel because there's a funeral and the angels are walking. So out of respect for the angels walking, we have to walk as well.
I don't know.
That's interesting.
I don't know. The chapter literally says a chapter writing during a funeral, and this would imply that it's not good to write during a funeral.
It seems like it, right?
But this could just be a thing, like out of respect. Like some cultures have, you take your hat off and people come in. Okay, you're not supposed to be riding a donkey or a horse when people are taking their dead by you.
Yeah.
But the point is that he then twists it somehow to attach a religious meaning that he saw angels walking by.
A metaphysical explanation.
It's a metaphysical matter, just like Farid, peace be upon him, says.
The dude abides. Not this time I said the name right, I think. Said great presentation, guys. I hope this helps towards the documentary.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I hope so too. We're definitely gonna make a documentary out of this.
And Yusuf Zai says, I'm gonna go prepare some straws for Farid. You'll need them after this.
I will need what was those straw figures? You scarecrows they made out of straw.
Straw man, right? Are you talking about the straw man? Sarah says the biggest mistake Dawa did was to put hadith online, let alone translate them. Seriously, I mean, it's bizarre, right? I mean, this stuff is useful for us, but I mean, I'm glad they put it online.
Honestly, like even if I was trying to do this 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to, because like these websites, these books that are available now due to digitization, they just wouldn't be available, even 20, 30 years ago. It was straight up, I'd say it'd be impossible to do something like this.
Yeah. One more comment I just want to read. Yusuf Zai says, I think this series is the ultimate kryptonite against Islam. There can be no better refutation other than a literal time machine to go back and see for yourself. Thank you for that comment. That's a great comment. Obviously, this would appeal to certain types of people, this presentation. People that are looking at it from a scientific, rational perspective, people that care about evidence. People that, when they see this, it clicks and it makes sense that, okay, this is what's happening. Obviously, some people, no matter what you show them, you can't convince them. But in regards to a certain type of person, I agree with you. This is very convincing.
There is one way that you could technically prove the epilepsy hypothesis or a theory, and that would be with hard empirical evidence. Is Muslims say that they have preserved hairs of Muhammad or his bodies preserved in the grave. If you could retrieve a biological sample, you could then test it to see his genetics if he was predisposed to epilepsy. And you could then actually really make the definitive case, conclusive case probably from that, given with what we know that, okay, maybe he did for sure suffer from it. But there's
also birth issues too, right? Like we believe there was birth issues involved too, like the suffering they went through in his life. Those things that would show up in the genes.
Exactly. Like, but the genes could give us more additional added confirmation that he did something. But that is a far-fetched story. I'm not inspiring people to go dig up Muhammad's grave and pull his body out right now. And that's not like, don't. Anyways, let's go to the next slide. 346. And Muhammad reports seeing 12 angels rushing around in the mosque. This is even weird. The Messenger of Allah was leading us in prayer when a man came and entered the mosque, and he was out of breath. He said, Allahu Akbar, blah, blah, blah. Then the Messenger of Allah had finished his prayer. He said, which of you is the one who spoke these words? People kept quiet. He said, he did not say anything bad. I did, O Messenger of Allah. I came and I was out of breath and I said it. The Prophet said, I saw 12 angels rushing to see which of them would take it up. So Muhammad is in the mosque and nobody else sees these 12 angels, but then he sees 12 angels rushing towards this guy to take up whatever he said. I don't know what to say about it.
As a Muslim, there's two ways I would have looked at this. One is like, yeah, there's actually angels running. The other way I could potentially look at it is I could say this is just like an emphasis from Muhammad. He's just emphasizing how good it was. And there's two more things I want to point out about this hadith, by the way. One is they were scared to tell him. They were nervous that he was going to get mad. The second thing is how interesting it is that the things that people say, they end up as part of this religion, right? Allahu Akbar, alhamdulillah, alhamdan, kathiran, tayyiban, barakan fi. You can actually say that in the prayer. That's like part of the prayer, like, and it came from a companion, which is like, that was just something that came from his mind, and that ends up as part of Islam.
Yeah,
there's quite a few examples of this, actually, right?
Exactly. Muhammad would like take sayings and phrases from companions like that. All right. Where are we? Next hadith, 347. So this is a very famous one. We've gone over this before. It's the famous dog killing hadith. Aisha reported that Gabriel made a promise with Allah's messenger to come at a definite hour. That hour came, but he did not visit. So Gabriel was like, yo, bro, I'm going to come Friday night at like 9 p.m., bro. Get ready. We're going to go out for drinks. We're going to have party time, some fun. But Muhammad's all ready and he's waiting for him. And then Gabriel never shows up. And then Muhammad's like waiting for an hour. And then more time passes and Muhammad's mad. And then it says, in Muhammad's hand, there was a staff, a stick, and he threw it from his hand out of the agitation he felt that his buddy Gabriel didn't show up. And then he shows up and then he found a puppy under his cot. And we've discussed like how did not notice the puppy. But yeah, it's outright bizarre, makes no sense. Like there's dogs everywhere on the planet Earth. Angels who just appeared. If they hate dogs, they might stop coming, like here, like it's just none of it makes sense. And then the idea that kill all the dogs, kill the black dog, this whole idea of the stupid delusion stems itself from Muhammad having this weird incident with his angel buddy not showing up on time. And I mentioned this before too, the House of Secrets on Netflix in episode 2, I believe, the cult, the whole family that killed himself, the guy that was hearing voices of his dad coming to him, he would also give him appointed times when he was going to come see him next. So this is something that ties into that. It's pretty interesting. Well, let's go to the next slide and see what we have. Muhammad is ill and his imaginary friend Gabriel pays him a visit, talks to him, and prays for his health. So Abu Sa'id reported that Gabriel came to Muhammad and said, Muhammad, have you fallen ill? And thereupon he said, yes, Gabriel. And then, in the name of Allah, I exorcise you from everything and safeguard you. And then basically Gabriel did this chant or this prayer for Muhammad to get him healed of his illness. Again, this is just a delusion where some psychotic person is sick, he's going through a hard time, and he's having these angels come and pray for him. In fact, this exact thing that the angel told me, I'm going to be all okay, Mom, occurs with somebody who is very famous. I'm not even joking, very famous in the contemporary music world. And he's going to show up. And it was his quotes. In quotes, he said, Mommy, the angel told me I will be okay. We'll get to that later. He's a very famous musician on par in the era. He was in Michael Jackson's era, almost on par with him in fame.
I have to say this comment is so funny. An angel with 600 wings is
Well, that's the thing. The angel scared Muhammad. Muhammad was so scared. He was trembling, hiding under a blanket, falling on the ground. But then this angel was scared of a puppy. Like you said, like when you think about it, it is so ridiculous. None of it makes sense from like any end, right?
Yeah.
But that's hilarious.
Yeah, it's interesting as well that Muhammad got sick. It's interesting. Okay, he's this special, blessed, holy guy. Not only does he get sick, he gets all the time sick, more sick than others, apparently, according to his own words. Prophets attested more. And even here, the angels praying for him, but he still got sick. Did the angels' dua not work? Like, imagine, like, you have angel praying for you. Like, does that even count? I don't know. Like, this is weird, right? Gets into some issues there.
It's a depressed, lonely man whose imaginary friend visits him and comforts him. Like that's what it is. And like the thing, like remember when he was rejected after Taif and he was pelted with stones and he was so depressed, and then suddenly Surah Jinn comes down and the jinns show up and they believe in you. Nobody believes in you.
That, I mean, actually, Hamza Yusuf points out that it was at the lowest point in his life when he had the Isra wal Miraj.
Exactly.
Everybody, like everything bad that could have happened. He lost his Khadija, he lost his uncle Abu Talib, and then his protection in Makkah as well went with that. And then Taif didn't work out, and then he had the Isra wal Miraj, this big thing where he sees God, and
And funnily enough, depression and stress are major triggers for epilepsy, and stress can literally cause epilepsy in people, like epileptic seizures. So it's
Yes.
it's very interesting that happened. Those big events or those big seizure hallucinations that are critical to his story or his sustained delusion also coincide with marked periods of depression and stuff, right?
Yeah. And this is kind of a funny comment. Angels were protesting to the boss man, but
Yeah.
like it makes a good point.
Yeah.
God wanted him to be sick. I mean, even the whole thing about praying in general is like, well, the angel knows why he is sick, yet angels praying for you means like
Yeah.
who is the bad? Like, almost want to say who's the bad guy here? God's the bad guy. Like he's the one that's making you sick, and everybody else seems to want you better except God. It's weird, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, these are like side points, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, it just shows you this his personality was weird. What this is painting is showing you the picture of how his mind worked and how he was predisposed to psychotic, delusional ways of thinking. That's what we were trying to point to. Because this is showing you how his epilepsy led to him. His whole life ended up becoming Islam. He's absorbed by his delusion, and then it showed up in so many parts of his life, but people just didn't notice or put it right. Some people did notice it in the beginning in Mecca and all that, but anyways, let's get to the next slide.
And thank you, Dill Duckworth, for your $10 donation. It's nice to have you here and appreciate.
Thank
the
you
donation
so
as
much.
well.
I really appreciate it. All right, so this is something weird. Now, Angel Gabriel came down and led Muhammad in prayer 5 times, and this is going on that, oh, where you verify what you're saying, and then he says that Gabriel came down and acted as my imam. Then I prayed with him, and then I prayed with him, prayed with him, prayed with him, prayed with him, prayed with him. Another thing, notice that Muhammad would sometimes repeat a lot of his sentences. This is a feature of the Quran sometimes as well. He would talk in threes. We will come to that as well. Sign of his OCD. Prayers itself, repetitive rituals, up and down, pecking your head on the ground. These are all signs of OCD, but this is just interesting that an angel came to him, stood in front of him, and then Muhammad's following. Think about this. Salah is Muhammad telling you that an angel came to him, some ghost came to him and did these motions, and then Muhammad is following those motions. It takes a completely different, much darker undertone when you think about it. Salah is just literally this guy's stemming behavior, where he's doing these ritualistic, repetitive behaviors to his OCD because they bring him comfort. A lot of the time, you'll see people who are overwhelmed, overstimulated. They'll, like move back and forth or like do things with their fingers and stemming behaviors. They're to calm themselves down, and this Salah is one form of that. But yeah, we'll get to that more in the detail in the OCD.
It's interesting that like when I was Muslim, I was taught that this was a sign of his great what's the word, like how well he spoke, right? And he's repeating himself, but you're right, this is weird. Like nobody talks like this. Gabriel came down and acted as my imam, and I prayed with him, and I prayed with him, and I prayed with him, then I prayed with him, then I prayed with him. Like who talks like that?
Think about any friend you have, any person you know in your life, come up to you and tell you that some invisible thing came to them and told them to repeat these motions that involve standing, bowing, and touching the floor with kissing the floor 5 times a day, and you have to do them in sets of 2s or 4s or 3s or whatever. You will straight up say, dude, you've lost your goddamn mind. Not kidding. And this should be everybody's response.
Yeah. But even what I'm saying here is like not just this hadith, but other hadith as well. But he repeats himself 2 or 3 times. Nobody talks like that, right? Like normally, I'm saying.
And then there's hadith where like he'd start talking in the morning and then keep talking about the Day of Judgment and talk about it the whole day till like Isha prayer. And yeah, he would get fixated on certain things like the Dajjal and whatnot. But yeah, let's get to the next slide. Are at 350. Again, Allah and Gabriel praise Muhammad's wife Khadija and assure her a place in heaven as she brings forth a delicious bowl of soup. This is just something weird where Muhammad's imaginary friend is just coming in just to praise his favorite wife. Like Gabriel came to the Prophet and said, "This is Khadija coming to you with a dish having meat soup or some food or drink. When she reaches, you greet her on behalf of her Lord and on my behalf and give her the glad tidings of having a palace in paradise. wherein there will be neither any noise nor any fatigue. I mean, Muhammad's happy. Yeah, he's getting some good biryani tonight. The wife's making some good food. So, the angels can like, yeah, you know what? She made you happy. Now Allah's happy too.
Gabriel's actually a prophet too. He's predicting that his wife is gonna walk in, because that's a prophecy. I predict your wife will walk in with a plate of biryani. And he's a Prophet Gabriel, alayhi salam.
Oh man. Well, like I said, this is just bizarre behaviors that make no sense. This one is just outlandish. When I, even as a Muslim, when I first saw this, I at first refused to believe it. And so I had to take a double take on the hadith. I'm like, what? The Prophet had a WWE wrestling match with Satan, with Iblis. Like, he was like a Great Khali versus like Batista. Like, what's going on? Like,
yeah.
But the Prophet once offered the prayer and said, Satan came in front of me and tried to interrupt my prayer, but Allah gave me an upper hand on him and I choked him. Interesting thing, and what you need to remember is these things will pop out. Muhammad was choked by an angel. Muhammad then chokes the demon. Interesting anomaly. So another one will come out later on is like Muhammad tried to kill himself by jumping off a mountain. Then there's hadith that say, don't kill yourself by throwing yourself off a mountain, for those are the worst and you keep falling in hell forever and ever. So you'll see that he will criticize himself inadvertently because of his OCD and scrupulosity, which we'll get to. But yeah, and then he ties the Satan to this pillar so that people can see him, but then he realizes, oh shit, people can't see the pillar now, got to make up an excuse. And then he says, you know what, I just let the Satan go because Allah only gave power of that to Solomon, right? So why would I take precedence? Let Solomon.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
You know what used to confuse me as a Muslim? I don't know why this is all coming back to me now.
Mm-hmm.
It used to confuse me that he said that Allah promised this special power for Solomon, yet he's still using that power. So that used to confuse me. Like, but what? Like, if you didn't have the power, then how are you beating up the genie? You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to make sense of it. Maybe I shouldn't do that.
There's nothing sensible in that.
Just stop. Yeah.
The more you try to make sense of this, the more your brain hurts. Like, and that's the beauty of it. Like when people try to perceive Muhammad and try to fit him in the expected framework of a guy who would have been normal, people somehow think like, oh my God, why did he do this? Why did he do that? It doesn't make sense. Therefore, he has to be the prophet of God. That's because you're putting him in a category of normal people. So you're expecting normal lines of thinking and behaviors, but that's not what happens. Normal people wouldn't like lead an army into battle because an angel told them to, straight up. But this happens with Muhammad a lot of the times. Anyways, let's go to the next slide. 352. Muhammad hallucinates hearing the voices of two dead people being tortured from inside their graves. So it's this guy is hearing dead people, like he's passing through one of the graveyards of Medina or Mecca, heard the voices of two persons who were being tortured in their graves. The Prophet said these two people are being tortured not for a major sin, and they're being tortured indeed, never saved himself for being soiled with his urine. Remember, we talked about this, and Muhammad had a weird obsession with having urine drops fall on him. This might be a reflection of his own insecurity related to his own problems. Who knows? Urinary incontinence, and Dr. Didikul speculated tying this in with hydrocephalus. That's a secondary point as well. But just another interesting that he hears dead people from inside their graves talking, or not even talking. He's hearing screams. He's hearing some people scream because they're being tortured. Think about if you hear screaming noises in your head, and then you're like, yeah, it's because that guy didn't clean his pee-pee. What? And then you go and you take a leaf and then put it on top of their grave and say, oh, till this leaf is or this branch is green, they won't get tortured. You have auditory hallucinations, you have delusional thinking, it makes no sense at all. And it just shows you again and again that the guy was not mentally in the right mind. Let's go to the next slide. This was an interesting one where, again, Muhammad is shown projections from heaven and hell on the wall of a mosque. The Prophet led us in prayer, then went up to the pulpit And then he said, when I started leading you in prayer, I saw a display of paradise and hell on the wall of the mosque. I never saw good and bad as I've seen today. He repeated the last sentence thrice again. He would speak in threes. But what's interesting is Allah had like this 4K, 8K, or whatever ultra high HD resolution projection of heaven and hell being displayed exclusively on the wall of the mosque in Medina in the 7th century for Muhammad to see while he was praying. But nobody else saw it, by the way. It's just him. The next slide we have is genies request Muhammad to stop cleaning themselves with bones, dung, and charcoal as its food for genies. Like, okay, this is just... Imagine one of your friends tells you that a deputation of the jinn came to him, and then they told him that please tell your friends to stop cleaning themselves with bones and dungs or charcoal because my genies eat them. You would look at your friend and you'd be like, what?
How does, one thing I don't get, I never understood this. You know how they say if you don't, say Bismillah, they say Muhammad said, if you don't say Bismillah, the devil eats with you, whatever. Same thing here. If you don't, but like physically, these things are unaffected. So what's the issue? I don't get it. You know what I mean?
It's a projection of like the thing is like the whole ideology Muhammad in his own head is confused. It's not thought out. It's coming out as it's happening in his own head.
Yeah.
So he projects humanistic traits onto gods, onto angels, onto genies. Like, for example, angels being offended by the smell of garlic. Mm-hmm. Angels don't have noses. They don't have... they just don't.
How do you know?
Right? Like they were walking earlier, but I thought angels had wings, bro. But they were drinking Red Bull or something. But this guy's like, oh, you can't ride a freaking donkey around them because they're walking. None of this makes any sense at all.
Yeah. I never understood this. It's just, anyways, we won't stay on this topic.
This one was funny where a genie carrying a torch is looking for Muhammad, and then he saw a genie wherever he looked. Again, Yahya related to me from Malik, when the messenger of Allah was taken on the night journey, he saw an evil jinn seeking him with a torch of fire. Whenever the messenger of Allah turned, he saw him. So he's turning around and he's seeing this jinn coming to him with a fire, holding a fire, right? It's just weird. Another thing that he saw the people covering the horizon everywhere. He saw Gabriel everywhere, and now he's seeing this jinn everywhere as well. Now we have the next hadith, which talks about the jinns hearing Muhammad recite Surah Rahman. So the messenger came out to his companion and recited Surah Rahman from the beginning to its end for them, and they were silent. So he said, I recited to the jinns on the night of the jinns, and they had a better response to it than you did. Each time I came to Allah saying, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, they would say, we do not deny any of your favors, our Lord, and yours is praise. This is very interesting, where Muhammad is apparently goes to his companions and recites Surah Rahman, chapter 55 of the Quran, or I believe. And this is the surah which repeats the phrase, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, nauseatingly. It's like every other verse is repeated. I actually ended up memorizing the surah back in the day. I still remember snippets of it. Ar-Rahman, Allama al-Quran, and all sorts. But yeah, so the people did not really seem to be like it or not. Like they were like silent. Yeah, whatever. It's just another surah of the Quran. It's nothing special. And then Muhammad gets annoyed. So he tells the companions, like, you don't think Surah Rahman is beautiful or not? Or you didn't have a reaction to it? The jinns had a better reaction to it. Every time I would recite, they would reply to my recitation, SubhanAllah, look at the attention the jinns were paying. And now Muslim genies come into the picture.
I think the companions must have been confused. They didn't know what to say. Like in the other hadith, they were scared. They're like all quiet. He's like, it's okay. I'm not mad at you. Then the guy's like, yeah, I said it. In this case, he's reading Quran and he wants it to be like some interactive jam session. Like, which of the flavors of God you deny? We don't deny. We don't deny. Which of the flavors of God we don't deny. He wants
interactive rap battle or some shit.
Okay.
Angels hate onions and garlic, be banished to the graveyard. This is like we were just talking about. Another thing with epilepsy sometimes is like the offensive smells you start smelling as an aura to seizures, and this pops up with a lot of patients. So sometimes the patients are explicit in showing their displeasure towards offensive smells, but it comes out as a secondary personality trait or as things they do. Right? So Muhammad says that he forbade the eating of onions and leek. When we were overpowered by desire to eat, we ate them. Upon this, the Prophet said, "He who eats this offensive plant must not approach our mosque, for the angels are harmed by the same things as men." No, it doesn't make sense. Angels are not the same as us. They shouldn't be harmed by the same things as us. Why is, I understand his point is don't come with a bad breath to the mosque. But again, another point, like coming back to part one, is with Dr. Ramachandran, everything takes a religious meaning. Everything is justified through religion. Why are you not like wearing the left sock or the right sock first? Is because the left hand is Satan's side or whatever. You make everything religion based. He who eats this offensive plant in Sahih Muslim should not approach our mosques, for angels are harmed by the same thing. On the right side, it's interesting where he said that ordering that the man who eats these things be taken out to the graveyard of Al-Baqi. That's so weird. So if somebody ate them, he would banish them to go there.
Wait, what does the rest of the hadith say? Whoever eats them, let him cook them to death. What does that even mean?
So you cook them so much till the point where the smell is burnt out or cooked out, and the flavor is yeah.
Like roast them back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Roast them like Allah will roast the disbelievers in Jahannam.
Yo, this is weird, man. How
The
is this
guy
like
was weird.
saying go to the graveyard? But
you
aren't the
think-
dead people affected by? So there's no angels in the graveyard, like.
Right? When you think about it, it makes no sense. Angels are everywhere. Why just the graveyard? There's two angels sitting on your shoulders. Can't they be offended by the same smell?
This is weird, yeah.
Okay. So, anyways, before we conclude this section, so last side of the section, I'm gonna say that there is so much more you can add to this. We have like a whole Islamic nonsense series. I remember 100 slides or something, the Circus of Islam show we did.
Yeah.
And that's all. Yeah, it just shows you and explains or gives you a deeper understanding why Muhammad came up with these bizarre BS things. And gives you an idea of like what kind of a mind he was involved in. If these are things from his daily life, just think about it. The thinking required for you to have a worldview like this, like everything you do, like you're spitting on people and telling them, oh, it's God's blessing in them, like they're drinking your blood and piss, it's blessing. Angels are like wrestling you, demons are wrestling you like WWE, and then you're choking the angel and tying them up, and then you're seeing angels running in the mosque and your friends flying with the angel in paradise. Like, guy, what are you on? This is not normal stuff, right?
Yeah. And in the Bible, Jacob wrestled with God. Muhammad wrestled with devils.
Man, it's
fell
funny
from
though.
grace, right? Yeah.
Anyways,
yeah, go ahead. No, you were gonna say something?
No, I was just gonna go to the next section. I'll
Okay.
take some questions and comments, because the next section we're gonna start talking about the Quran, analyzing the Quranic rhymes, the repetitions, the frequency of repetition, what it means, hypergraphia. And now we're gonna get into some really interesting stuff.
Let me see. Let's take a look and see if there's any comments that need to be referred to. I don't see anything. Oh yeah, this was a good comment. We can talk about this. Imagine telling these stories to Muslims slightly altered, but not telling them it's from Islam to see the reactions. This is exactly what Abdullah Gondal was doing on his Facebook, making stories about Xenu. Right?
The creator of Xenu pops up in this presentation too, actually. L. Ron Hubbard. Funnily enough, guys, this is the funny thing. His wife and a couple of people say he was schizophrenic, and he was even diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. If you Google right now, who is the guy who holds the world record, a single person to author the most number of books? It's L. Ron Hubbard. He holds a Guinness Book of like 1,000 some plus books, right? So like, how can these people with such disorders like be writing this much and creating such these big cults that are now world famous and attracting celebrities? Like, like Tom Cruise and whatever. But anyways, we're gonna get to that. But this is the point. This section is gonna be very interesting. There's a statistical analysis that is coming up, which will show you how Muhammad's literally, you'll see him think. You will understand his thinking or his thought process. Okay. But yeah, let's get to it.
Fatal.
Hypergraphia is another indication of temporal lobe epilepsy. Usually people suffering from temporal lobe epilepsy, they're prone to write profusely. Sometimes they are poetic writing. Sometimes they rhyme with each other. That's why the early revelations are rhyme very much. There is this rhythmic, poetic language which doesn't exist in the later revelations. And there were many, many people in the history, which I've enlisted in my book, that are believed to have temporal lobe epilepsy.
Hypergraphia means writing a lot.
Okay.
In his case, if we accept the argument that he was illiterate and he was not writing, it is coming out in the form of verbalized. Yes. So he's showing it in that fashion.
So you can confirm as a doctor that people who have epilepsy, they get
hypergraphia. Of two conditions can do that, and he had both of them. Mm-hmm. It happens with the obsessional thinking, the compulsion, writing a lot is a part of the compulsions. And also then there is also seizure, and this is adding to that, and then so there is that.
Why does it happen?
It is again goes back that this is happening in left temporal lobe. Left temporal lobe, the main function of it, although these are very important, but it is actually the latest part of a brain. It is the part which distinguishes between human beings and animals. The fact that they can talk. That is in left hemisphere. You have a stroke in the left hemisphere, you go mute. Now, when this is happening to him, you're going to see language-related issues.
Oh, because our left
hemisphere is in charge of language.
In charge of language.
Yes.
Okay.
No doubt about it. Except if you are left-handed, then it goes to the right side.
Right.
Actually, it becomes mixed up.
Okay, so it's because it's responsible of language, they get more talking or what?
Because it is there, you can have a variety of problems. And this is so wide because there are so many things related to language.
All right, so this is very important, the explanation he's giving, like what hypergraphia is. If you cannot read or write, if you cannot write, then it'll come up as verbal hypergraphia. He then explains that how it can change in different people, how the left half of the brain is predominantly in most people responsible for the language center. The Wernicke's and the Broca's areas are very close proximity to the temporal lobe on the left side. This concept is called lateralization, which is an idea that talks about certain cognitive functions or abilities are specialized to certain hemispheres or certain parts of the brain. So language is predominantly left part. So sometimes seizures, what they do, if they originate in the focal in the temporal lobe or even on the right side, they might cause an imbalance due to this set of neurons in the Wernicke's and Broca's area, which can come up at times as compulsive rhyming in patients who had absolutely no history of rhyming. We'll get to that in a second, but this is very important because it can also take the form of painting, singing, drawing, so many different types, right? But whilst keeping this in mind, let's go to the next slide. Now, what I did here, I don't know if you can read the wording, it is a little bit tiny, but I took the Quran and I took it in order of the revealed surahs. Okay, so you get the first 5 or 6 surahs, which is Iqra, Surah Noon, Mudassir, Muzammil, and excluding Fatiha, there's Surah Al-Lahab or Masad. So then what I did was I then only took the Meccan verses, i.e., the surah, the verses that were revealed in Mecca, because these surahs had injected verses revealed in Medina from 20 years later. Think about this. These surahs were the first ones to be revealed, and for 13 years, there's nothing added. And 13 years after, in Medina, verses were being added to it. So I removed those just to get an idea of what exactly did Muhammad come up with in his actual first revelation that he was speaking out to the Meccan people. Because they kept saying to us that Muhammad is crazy again and again and again and again. They must have noticed something that Muhammad was saying that caused them to claim he is crazy. Let's see what he said. So when you do an analysis, let's quickly go back, to the next slide, and then we'll come back to this slide again, is you put these verses out and have color-coded them. You see a pattern emerge, okay? In Surah 96, Iqra, Surah Mudassir, Muzammil, you have a set of verses in the beginning which either comforts Muhammad, tells him to do something, or don't worry about what the disbeliever is saying. Then these surahs go nuts. They go like, threat, 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 disbelievers bad, Jahannam, Jahannam, afterlife, threat, 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 threat. Each and every time. You go now, if now you go back to that same slide before, you get Surah Alaq, you see first 5 verses, you have a commanding voice telling Muhammad what to do, and then it goes on. Red ones are the threats and translation. The yellow ones are kind of like hellfire, whatnot. But they're still talking about obsessed, ideated, the thoughts are fixated against repeating hellfire, threats, afterlife. Hellfire, threats, afterlife. Muhammad wasn't coming with anything apart from these poems in the beginning. So when people are like, hey, dude, like, bring us some evidence, he didn't really bring anything. And he just kept coming with these poems. But yeah, so well, let's go back to the next slide. You can pause, read the verses, how I've highlighted them. And again, this is not like written in stone. There is a little bit of flexibility, but just to give you a general idea. 70% of the verses revealed in the first 5 chapters in Mecca were threats of hell, condemnation of fear-mongering directed towards unbelievers. Most chapters start by comforting Muhammad. A clear pattern emerges with fixation on hell and afterlife and threats. As early as the 2nd revealed chapter, Surah Noon, Surah Qalam, we see 2 mentions of Muhammad being suspected as crazy. Does an all-wise God introduce his message to the world in such a manner where he's just threatening everybody and giving them these condemnations of hellfire and whatnot? So this is something that I noticed that was very interesting, that, of course, the people of Mecca would have noticed as well. So after this, we are going...
People of Mecca not as dumb as Islam tries to paint them.
They weren't as dumb. Think about this. If they were as dumb, like a couple of Muhammad's uncles were like vehemently against them. The chiefs of Mecca, like for 11, 13 years, they kept calling him crazy. They would have known something. They had people who had gone to Persia. They kept saying that you are just repeating stories of the ancient. Haza Satirul Awwaleen. They definitely have heard these stories. Then there was Christians living nearby. There's Jews in Khaybar, Jews in Medina. Muhammad's guy Waraka was translating stories, the Bible. Muhammad was exposed to these stories too. So over time, hearing them, he came up with a mishmash version. Because of epilepsy, he might get confused and then change certain details. Hence, this could also explain certain details being mixed up by Muhammad in some stories. Lots to it, but yeah. This is a clear pattern that emerges in the first 5 chapters. And this is just a small sample just to show you that something went off in this guy's head where it was just like, do this, you're the prophet of God, and threat whoever doesn't believe in you. But yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of these are actually implying specific people in his life. Like, leave me with the one I created alone, and whom I gave extensive wealth and children present with him and spread... I'm trying to remember the name now. It was one of the famous enemies of Islam. But anyways, like these are people in his life he's getting mad at, and he's
Yeah.
actually cursing them in the Quran.
Like Surah Masad is a classic example where like God is in a yelling match, like a child, like, you know, ruined Abu Lahab, ruined is he and his wife go to hell. Like, come on, guys, like this is. But anyways, once we establish this, we'll go to slide number 362, where Dr. Dede Kurko then discusses his hypergraphia a little bit too. On the left side, he says, a careful reading of the Quran reveals many instances of loquacious, pedantic, overly detailed, and peripheral ideation that sometimes goes on in a rather incomprehensible manner, all adding up to circumstantiality, a trait of personality function prevalent in CPS, complex partial seizure patients. Anyone reading the Quran will notice that Muhammad sometimes goes on and on about very little. Another CPS personality trait that we need to look at is viscosity, a stickiness in oral and riddle productions that is beyond common sense, like a needle stuck in a crack on a phonograph record. If you can find this in Muhammad's thought process, and we have more evidence of his CPS illness. So then he says, hypergraphia is the expression of viscosity in the written mode. Many evaluators of the Quran have superficially noticed this without realizing its true neurological significance. What is happening neurologically is the process of sort of lock reverberation of memory tapes in the hippocampus section of the temporal lobe of the brain. Thus, one reads in the Quran at the endless repetition of the same material over and over again. And he gives you a little bit of like an example about Surah 96. You can pause and read that if you want to, in Surah 109, where it's like, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ وَلَا أَنَا عَابِدٌ مَا عَبَدتُّمْ وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ. He literally keeps repeating the phrase back and forth, and it's a weird thing. And the picture on the extreme right, he says that Muhammad seemed fond of the phrase Jannatun tajri min tahtiha al-anhar or something like that. He kept repeating this phrase, and he then lists out where, and this is an example of viscosity in Surah 77. I believe that Surah Mursalat, that one is a weird one. So in Surah 77, in the end, I think it goes in Wailun yawma izil lil mukazzibin or something like that, where Allah just curses like every alternating verse upon the disbelievers, as if the guy had a mental breakdown in this surah. Very interesting chapter. Do check it out. But does give you insights into the author who was writing the Quran.
What is CPS?
Complex partial seizures. So it's just a
Okay.
small acronym for that.
Okay, got it. So this is interesting. This is actually an analysis of the Quranic text and finding that this is representing examples of hypergraphia, right?
Now we're going to quickly go over these. I did mention them in the first presentation we did way back last year, but we're going to go over this quickly. Hypergraphia for poetry in an epileptic patient. So this one is a 58-year-old right-handed man complained of being driven to write poetry. For 5 years, he experienced words continuously rhyming in his head, and he felt the need to write them down and show his writing to others. He did not talk in rhyme, write excessively in non-rhyme, or read poetry. The patient had not had a preoccupation with poetry until age 53. And basically, he also goes on about he had epigastric rising, complex partial seizures. The doctor reported the patient being circumstantial and viscous in conversation, a great characteristic, it's like we just learned from Dr. Didakurka, that is predominant in the Quran as well. I'm going to go to the next slide now, and that will be viscosity and social cohesion and temporal lobe epilepsy. Clinical case reports suggest a viscosity, the behavioral tendency to talk repetitively and circumstantially about a restricted range of topics, is common in patients with TLE. Such patients are also reported to exhibit heightened levels of social cohesion, the tendency to become interpersonally clingy. The sticky interpersonal style may be particularly common in TLE patients with a left-sided temporal lobe seizure focus. Reminding you that when Muhammad, in one of the parts we did, his head pulled to the right side, and Dr. Abbas was saying that his focus of his seizures might have been on the left side. Anyways, this goes on. It's quite common in people with temporal epilepsy, viscous and circumstantial speech, and obsessive focus on small set of topics. We're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to just quickly go over this, where a patient starts to compulsively rhyme after treatment of her epilepsy. Her verses were discrete, highly structured, and creative outputs, unlike others. And you can pause, read the details if you want, and then we're going to go to the next slide by Dr. Dede Kurkut. He then goes on to elaborate a patient who had a similar case to Muhammad in terms of behavior and his hypergraphia. On the top part, you see that people who have complex partial seizures markedly write number of words in written response for the same problem. For 4,200 to 5,540 words. Possible CPS patients 120 words, and general patients are 33 words. So think about that. CPS patients have a tendency to talk or keep on going on and on and on about the same thing, to the point that differences, let's say you take 120 to 5,000, that's quite a huge factor, significance of difference.
And a lot of the Quran is just repeating the same thing over and over again.
Exactly. It's stuck on the same
stories.
idea.
Yeah, and the same stories
Exactly.
repeated multiple times. I mean, I remember even reading some reviews of the Quran which explains that even the story of Moses, it's in Surah Noon, it's in Surah Baqarah, it's in, it's Surah Taha. It's like all, I don't know if it's actually in Surah Noon, but, it's like all over the place, right? Little pieces here and there.
Exactly. Yeah, it just pops up once, and if you're not fully aware of the story, you'll be like kind of lost if you're listening to it. Like, okay, wait, what? Moses did this? I didn't know. I was supposed to know this. It's a passing reference. Anyways, hypergraphia is one of the more obvious traits of the interseizure behavior complex. So he gives a case where at the age of 34, he began to have occasional grand mal seizures. 7 years later, he began to have episodes in which he felt dazed, unaware of his surroundings. He started seeing green and purple flashes of light wherever he looked. Remember Muhammad seeing the green screen covering the horizon and seeing things wherever he looked? He began to spend many hours a day in volunteer work for religious organizations. He preached several sermons at his church at his own suggestion. He spontaneously volunteered typed copies of these sermons to his physician. The sermons concerned highly moral issues, which were dealt with in highly circumstantial and meticulous detail. In his productions, he made frequent and precise definitions and digressions along secondary themes. It's pretty interesting how this guy's personality changes. He gets obsessed with, religious sermons, preaching about religion, dawa, the whole thing. And he keeps writing and talking about religious topics and stuff. And that's pretty interesting and similar to Muhammad. Now, in the next slide, we're going to find something interesting. We see something, and before we have Dr. Abbas explain it, in the first few chapters of the first Meccan faith of the Quran, we start off with the compositions being highly poetic, but then there's a trend. It starts getting less and less and less and less poetic and more prosaic. And when you get to Medina, it is so much more prosaic that scholars, Western scholars, I'm not going to name who, have told me, like leading experts, that it's almost like somebody else wrote the second half of the Quran. The way the literature, the way it comes out, it's like it's markedly different. Now, and one theory is that because of his epilepsy, when he started, it brought out his creativity, his rhyme, as we'll see in some cases coming up. But over time, with age on its own, and then his epilepsy worsening and not being treated, and his delusions worsening, his ability to rhyme was lost. And that's why the Quran, when he gets longer into Muhammad's life, it's more long-winded verses. It doesn't make as much poetic sense. It's harder to read, hard to understand. It's more concerned with laws, and it's more meticulous detail and stuff. And a lot of violence too. Yeah, something interesting to note. We'll listen to Dr. Abbas, and then we're going to conclude this section on the Quran, and we're going to get into the violence part of his disorder.
I have heard this from my friends, psychologists, that who were good in Arabic, but they were not Muslim, and also the Muslims, that they all kind of agreed that this is just very nice language. It is very nicely written,
Right.
and so on. So then what you are seeing is that as he is getting worse, as time is passing by,
Right.
you don't have that eloquent surahs of when he was in Mecca. There is more problems. It is destroying, it is causing more problem in the left temporal lobe. So he's not as eloquent. His vocabulary is not as good. You cannot compare the Baqarah, as far as I know,
Right.
to the first one.
اقرأ العلق, for example.
I mean, that is,
Or الكوثر or الضحى or الشمس.
although it is my, I don't know, second or third language,
Mm.
I can see that these are, it is obviously very, very different.
Right.
And what can cause this except deterioration of left temporal lobe?
Right.
So, a very interesting point he made there again. Another thing I'd like to add to it is if the Quran's best and most poetic and beautiful parts were revealed in Mecca, and they were the first earlier surahs, why did the Meccans, who are these champions of recognizing Arab poetry, instead of seeing, oh my God, the Quran is such an amazing book, instead they said Muhammad is crazy? Why would they say that? If Quran's best parts resulted in Muhammad being labeled crazy, think about what it says about it.
Nobody accepting it for 13 years almost.
He had 100 followers, a couple hundred maximum, that he had to send to Abyssinia, half of them. It was only after, when he got to Medina, when he got political influence, that he gained followers. When he started exerting his military influence, he started Islam started spreading faster.
Can you guys still hear me? It looks like Bill Gondel got froze up, and I'm not sure if this is still streaming.
I'm back here.
Okay,
hey
you're
guys,
back.
yeah. Okay,
Hi.
Just a hiccup, but we'll get back to it. I think we were talking about his like his ability to like exert political influence that led to the growth of Islam in Medina versus Mecca, where he was rhyming with the best of his ability, with the best of the Quranic surahs, and yet he could only get 100 followers, right? So it just speaks that the Quranic literary argument that it's some big book that was so impressive, the Meccans are falling on their faces over the poetic beauty of this book, doesn't make sense when they're calling you crazy for the exact same reason.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's keep going, and we will go to the violence aspect. This is interesting. And this is something that we see that people that are epileptic in some ways can become violent, not always. This is, again, not to say that everybody with epilepsy is violent, no, but this can come up as a symptom when you're challenging people with delusional beliefs. So let's see. And this can also come up with not only just explicit violence from the person himself, but soliciting murder, soliciting violence through religious means via other agents as well. But let's get to it. This is going to be the first slide. We're going to start off. It says, I want to die over and over again. Abu Hurairah said, what?
The repetition again.
Yeah. And that's something that I wanted to point out. Yeah. Abu Hurairah said, by in whose hand my life is, I would love to fight in Allah's cause and then get murdered and resurrected and come to life, get murdered, resurrected, come to life, get murdered.
You need to read the full thing to show just how weird it sounds.
And think about it, that this is how the prophet sometimes spoke. And it's just like, dude, it's just weird. But yeah, this is something that will pop up again and again. We have a small clip, I believe, from Dr. Abbas again, where he briefly talks about violence, how it can come up as a part of epilepsy and how it ties in.
Having problem with aggression is a, we deal with it every day. It's everyday business. But for a moral person, for a religious person, for a person who has lost his wife, has been through all of this, and then has been actually, when the environment only permits, to be patient, alas,
Mm.
to be patient and so on. Once he gets into the environment that he has followers who would do what he wants, it's just like anybody that you see in the history of mankind who became killed a lot of people.
Mm.
Is that,
Murder.
well, I don't want to be disrespectful, but yes, what he did was that he developed certain behaviors which does not match him and does not match men of his age, and it is only caused by people who have neurological problems.
Mm.
Some of these are just awful behaviors that you wouldn't expect a person who is,
A religious man.
yes, and a person who is so moralistic and this, that, and so on. That, the things that he did in wars, torture, killing, and he actually killed him.
All right, so that was an interesting bit that talks about Muhammad's disposition of violence. So there is in the Quran literally beheadings in the Quran. I mean, that's pretty extreme behavior by any measures. But what we're gonna get to is a little brief overview quickly over Muhammad's life. Some major points about his violence. We're not gonna go into details of everything because we're just gonna skim over to get the idea. But here we have Muhammad, the warlord. Now, after Muhammad moved to Medina, like I said, it was when he got political influence. There are 62 raids or battles by the Muslim army in the last 10 years of his life. When you do the maths, you get about a battle or a raiding party every 2 months or so on average. And out of those, only 3 to probably can pushing it maximally 5 were in self-defense. So you get a figure of 92 to 95% of the wars or raiding parties or attacks were actually Muslims being proactive. This was what we should have been discussing last night in the debate with the Hakika Jew, was how many wars, the frequency of warfare and whatnot. But this actually then gives you a horrifying figure where you then realize, okay, Muhammad in the last 10 years of his life went with this straight up ideology, which was the sword, and he inflicted it with no mercy. And as he said, it starts to make sense. The more you read Muhammad's Sirah, he said, I have been made victorious with terror. And this is not just him saying it. Well, I mean, it is him, but Allah says it through Muhammad again in the Quran too, that I make you victorious with the help of terror. I just posted some screenshots of some of the battles highlighted. This is not an exhaustive list, but just to give you an idea. There's lots more. You can even add to the list as well, depending on whose list you're taking from. Next slide, we're going to go to just to quickly cement the idea that when Muhammad said, Allah's apostle said, no, that paradise is under the shades of the sword. So this is quite a significant statement to make. I mean, the thing is, if it was just a few violent statements, But the thing is, in Islam and the Quran, the most holy text, we find beheadings. We find angels being asked to smite the necks and fingertips of disbelievers and being harsh and whatnot. The fact is, there's so much of it that it becomes to a point where it's statistically significant chunk of the Quran and the theology is dedicated to this. And that's why this is a huge problem. Anyways, let's keep going. I heard my father saying that the gates of Jannah are under the shades of the swords. And then because of this statement, this man heard this and he was so taken that he's going to go to heaven right now, that he broke the scabbard of his sword and threw it away and rushed towards the enemy with his sword and fought till he was martyred. So this is manipulation with religion and the promise of huris and Jannah being used to make people fight for your cause, i.e. manipulation. The Messenger of Allah said, I've been commanded to fight the people until they testify that there's no right to worship Allah and I'm the messenger of Allah. I've been commanded to fight the people, and it talks about, and this hadith is being used by a lot of, Daniel Hakika, you can tell you that offensive warfare and spreading Islam to the whole world is part of Islamic theology, and that's where it comes from. And this delusion, when it first started, was not this, but then over time, Muhammad kept thinking, I'm the chosen one, I'm going to spread this thing to the whole world, and it kind of got out of hand. The next slide, we're just going to quickly show some verses of the Quran that signify some sort of violence, that if just the fact that they exist in the Quran disqualifies it from being a book of the Word of God, because you wouldn't expect God to be such explicitly violent in his last message to mankind. In fact, the way these violence notions come out also shows that this is a product of a damaged mind and not a wise God. 2:16, that jihad, fighting in the way of Allah, is ordained for you, though you may dislike it. So you're basically being gaslit into fighting, or guilt tripped into fighting for Muhammad's cause. We shall cast terror into the hearts of the unbelievers. 3:151, 8:39, fight them until there's no more fitna, and all religions for Allah the whole, spreading Islam to the world.
Your sound went low just now.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yep, now it's good. Yeah.
Then there's strive against the hard against the disbelievers and hypocrites, and be harsh against them. The sword verse is there. And the thing is, one thing to know, Surah 9, Surah Tawbah, is one of the last surahs to be revealed in Muhammad's life, like legit one of the last ones. So a lot of the scholars say that this surah abrogates a lot of the other peaceful things, because this is one of the Muhammad's lasting legacy, what he left to the world. So, and then you see that there's some couple of beheading verses where the angels are being asked to behead. Like, at what kind of delusional thinking do you get to that you're like, okay.
You know, I was just thinking about this when you were presenting the other slides about the anger he was showing even in the early verses, the ones which are the most beautiful, like the most, the short surahs. And the only difference between those and these is that at that time he could just curse them. Now he had power, right?
And then I remember there was before he migrated to Medina, in one of the seerah, I forgot which one, he said to the Meccans, I will inflict slaughter upon you, or something. And he did exactly that. And the thing is, like, because he was tortured by the Meccans or persecuted by them, that probably would have pushed him more, because of his psychotic delusion, to retaliate once he got the chance in a more violent way. And he can justify it because he's God's messenger.
Yeah.
The next slide is terrorism is help from God. I mean, anybody who says I've been helped by terror is obviously like God. No, you're not talking to God. You're talking to some scary angel or demon. I mean, who's choking you like a ketchup bottle. So I guess the terror still hasn't left you. I mean, yeah, this is repeated a few times in the Quran itself. And in the hadith too. In the last one, it says, I have been supported with fear. While I was sleeping, the keys of the treasures of the earth were brought to me and placed in my hands. So this guy has that narcissism too, right? He thinks he's got the keys of everything in the universe or the world, treasures in his hand. It's delusional, like.
Muhammad says, I've been given the keys to treasure of earth. Genghis Khan, hold my beer. All right, let's continue. Yeah.
Now, next one is going to be the infamous massacre of Banu Qurayza. And I mean, this is just sad. And on the left side, we have Sirah bin Ishaq, and it mentions briefly what happened. And the number it says, you can talk about whoever's judgment it was. The fact that Muhammad says Allah affirms the same judgment and that it's the same God and Allah agrees with it. Muhammad agreed with it. He had the power to overturn it, but he didn't. In fact, he inflicted this punishment in the most gruesome ways. Then the apostle of Allah went out to the market of Medina, which is still the market today, and dug trenches in it. Then he sent for them and struck off their heads in those trenches as they were brought out to him in batches. Among them was the enemy of Allah, Huway, and Ka'b bin Asad, their chief. They were 600 to 700 in all, though some put the figure as high as 800 or 900. Now, the fact that this happened, just picture this. This is straight up like a movie or a scene from an ISIS propaganda video. Like, this is the script for an ISIS propaganda video where batches of people are coming and there's these trenches and guys just like chopping heads off, hundreds of them tossed into these mass graves in the market of Medina. What is going on? Now, on the right side, what is more disturbing is on that day, we were presented to the messenger of Allah. Those who had pubic hair that had grown were killed, and those whose pubic hair had not yet grown were let go. And then it goes on to the same thing. This guy was literally chopping off kids' heads. No joke. There is no explanation for this. You cannot tell me that a kid who's merely grown pubic hair has the same mental capacity, physical maturity of an adult. In fact, the fact that these people don't understand biology, that adolescence is not a switch, it's not an on-off where one night you wake up and the next day you're an adult. No, it's stages, it's a lot of development that goes on for years. And the fact that this guy taught that you could chop off 11, 10, 12-year-old kids, or even younger if you make the argument that in the hot Arab lands, kids mature young. It's just sad that somebody beheaded so many people in the name of God. It just doesn't make sense. And remember, this was inspired by, remember the story where Dihya Kalbi came to Muhammad sitting on a horse, wearing a turban and a robe. Muhammad thought it was not Dihya, it was actually Gabriel. And then Dihya told him to go to Banu Qurayza. This whole story is so bizarre. Like this angel showing up and telling him to do this, and it was not an angel, his friend, whatnot. But yeah, it's just hard to stomach that a God can inspire this. We then have Dr. Abbas quickly explain us that if you challenge patients about their delusions, they become irritated, and hence they will attack you, or they might solicit something like this.
What happens is that if the person believes in a delusion, and you have probably seen people who, I had a patient who was thinking that Russians have put something in his head and they're controlling his behavior.
Right.
Now, if you contradict this with the person, you challenge him, no, which in old times they used to do that, and it would just irritate the person. Now, what we tell everybody, the nurses and so on, is, it's just back off, give him the medicine, and until the condition goes away. But you will easily see it, that if a person has developed illusions, delusions, hallucinations, all these type of things that you are seeing in him, you contradict that, you are going to get him angry. And if you're a prophet of God, then you can do whatever you want.
Right.
Which in his case was permitting decapitation, which is just far too strong of a behavior. If it was just if you would tell me I'm a bad psychologist.
He's not wrong. Like when anybody says, yeah, God told me to go behead those guys and stuff, it's just too extreme of a thought that you're hearing voices that are telling you to go behead people. Huh? Like that's not okay. Carrying on, even he was lost for words. Like this is extremely strong behavior. We're gonna just quickly go off on this. So we're gonna go off. There's a blind man who had a slave mother who used to abuse the Prophet and disparage him, Muhammad. And then this guy stabbed her. Muhammad said her blood is okay to be spilled. You don't need to pay for her blood. We then have the two singing girls that were killed, and a couple of people listed here. Then on the right side, we have Muhammad sending Assassin's Creed style assassination parties. No joke. This guy would literally sell assassins to go kill somebody in a different city or town, in a different castle. People like scale up the walls like Assassin's Creed and then do this whole weird thing. Allah's Messenger sent some people from the Ansar to kill Abu Rafi, who used to hurt Allah's Messenger. Right? And he was sleeping and they were killed. Again, the next one, we have some more. There's actually a funny thing I say, this Muhammad's Dead Poets Society. So you'll see on the next slide that we have a few more poets that he killed. He's finally, like Dr. Abbas said, if you question and challenge them, and you challenge them in ways like in satirical, poetic ways, and they're dumbfounded, the way they react is with violence. So here you see Muhammad and said, Ka'b bin Ashraf, go, who will kill him, for he has hurt again. And then after Ka'b bin Ashraf, in other books, we have more names. Abu Afaq was killed, and Asma bint Marwan, and then, yeah, you can argue about the authenticity about each individual story, but the point is that there's just so many of them with the same end main essence of the point of killing poets and blasphemers, is you start understanding why Muhammad was like this. Now, we're going to go to the next slide. These are things you might have already always heard, and different criticism of Islam pop up in different forms, but just connecting this back to his neurology is what makes this important, because this is what you're going to the core, the source of everything Islam is Muhammad. So an interesting verse here I just brought up is kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrajat lin-nas. Now this is, I think, Surah Imran verse 3110, yeah. And I remember Dr. Zakir Naik uses this verse so much to say that you're the best people created for mankind because you give the messenger of Allah and you stop people from bad things. But the tafsir say otherwise. The tafsir say, like Ibn Kathir, you're the best nation for the people because you bring them tied in chains on their necks, capture them in war, and when they later embrace Islam. And on the right side, Sahih al-Bukhari literally quotes Muhammad in a hadith explaining this verse. You Muslims are the best of people ever raised up for mankind, means the best of people for mankind, as you bring them with chains on their necks till they embrace Islam. This speaks huge volumes about what kind of ideology Islam is. It's not an ideology that's talking about freedom of religion. It's like we're now getting to understand. It's very much so based on violence, oppression, and using the sword to establish the rule of Islam. The next slide, I'm not going to say what it says, as you can all read it, because I don't want to get demonetized, but there are instances reported in Muhammad's life where I'm just not going to say it. You can read it. It's pretty clear. You can argue about its authenticity, but the point isn't that. The point is that there's just too many numerous incidents of the same nature about the same man that it just speaks about something was going on with him. Now we go up to the next slide. This one's the apostates and atheists. Here we are affirmed in multiple narrations that you have to kill the atheists because they're, and the word is Zindiq. Ali actually ended up burning some of them, and then they rebuked Ali for that, but still affirmed that you still gotta kill them. I know there's a vigilante affirmation where during the last years young foolish people will appear, their faith won't go beyond their throats, so kill them wherever you find them. These things are just irresponsible statements from Muhammad, given that if you're saying these things, you're encouraging vigilantism in the end of times, and you know that end of times, every time that you live in, people think it's the end of times. Okay, so it's this recipe for paranoid people going off.
Yeah.
This was just a quick skim over some of the highlights of his life where his violence popped up, which is not normal levels. This is abnormal types of violence, killing hundreds of people. And when you think about it, Muhammad killed some people by himself when in war, but he also solicited the murder of a lot of people. When you think about it, all the killings that happened under the name of Islam and Muhammad was alive probably end back on his hand, because he's ended up being responsible for ordering the army to go there or there at nighttime. The army didn't go on its own to kill those kids at night. It was Muhammad commanding those things, right? So when he needs theology to work for him, he can twist and change it around. We're done with this section now. We're going to go to the interesting scrupulosity OCD section. And then there's one more section of famous cases, and we're done with the presentation after.
Awesome. Okay.
So this is very, very interesting. What is scrupulosity? This is International OCD Foundation. We're going to read this, and you'll start to see that as I read this, these are traits that you see in Muhammad's personality jump at you. A form of OCD involving religious or moral obsessions. Scrupulous individuals are overly concerned that something they thought or did might be a sin or other violation of religious or moral doctrine. What are symptoms of scrupulosity? Common obsessions seen in scrupulosity include excessive concerns about blasphemy, having committed a sin, behaving morally, purity, i.e. voodoo, going to hell, death, a loss of impulse control. Besides excessive worry about religious and moral issues, Scrupulosity sufferers engage in mental or behavioral compulsions. Behavioral compulsions could include excessive trips to confession, repeatedly seeking reassurance from religious leaders and loved ones, repeated cleansing and purifying rituals. Very, very specific. Acts of self-sacrifice, avoiding situations in which they believe religious moral error would be especially likely. Mental compulsions could include excessive praying, sometimes with an emphasis on the prayer needing to be perfect. Remember the times Muhammad would sit in the mosque and a person would pray and then he'd be like, oh, go repeat your prayer. You did it too fast or it wasn't pure enough.
Yeah.
It's kind of adding up. Repeatedly imagining sacred images or phrases, zikr, sitting there repeating the phrase Allahu, Allahu, whatever. Making pacts with God. These are literally very on point in how they're described.
Wow.
They're very
Like-
on point.
They should just put like one line. See Muhammad.
But now, next slide, we're going to go into a little more academic way of what OCD is for the prevalence of this. So we have this paper, Epilepsy and OCD. OCD has long been associated with epilepsy. The link with TLE, usually refractory epilepsy, is particularly prominent. Of temporal epilepsy patients, 10 to 22% of patients may have OCD, often underdiagnosed in the outpatient clinic. Okay, then it goes on to says they have noted the obsessive qualities of washing, symmetry, exactness, and ordering with a greater preoccupation with certain aspects of religion. This, my guys, symmetry, left side, right side first, ordering, you got to do the salah in a specific order, the wudu has to be in a specific order, things have to be this way, that. Washing, it's very much adding up to this is just describing how Muhammad was. Now, we're going to get in another video by Dr. Abbas where he then talks a little bit about what Muhammad's scrupulosity or OCD was. Let's find out.
He was a religious person to begin with. I mean, he used to pray, going to the, and from very young age.
Right.
And that is a part of that, some obsessive compulsive traits that he had. Now, then it can become so bad, ritualistic behaviors of the patient, that you have to give him the symptom medicine to slow it down. I mean, it is totally interfering with life. I've had many patients like that, and it is mostly with the obsessive compulsive personality.
So what happened in the life of Muhammad that made you think he became hyper-religious in relation to his epilepsy?
He just got more. It is not like that he was not to begin with.
So it grew in.
It grew in, and then it became all of life. There was nothing besides religion.
So that's very interesting where he says that Muhammad's OCD ended up making basically everything about religion. Everything took a religious undertone and whatnot. So we're going to continue quickly. We see in this slide, Gabriel showed Muhammad how to do ablution 3 times for each body part. Like we were talking about, ritualistic washing and purity rituals that are told to him by an angel. When he first received revelation, Gabriel came to him and taught him the ablution. When he finished the ablution, he took a handful of water and then sprinkled his private parts with it. What? So I don't even know what to make of this. So the angel tells you to do wudu, and then you sprinkling water over your private parts because the angel told you to. And then he says it 3 times, and this is just to show what the wudu is. You got to 3 times your hands, your arms each side, and your face, and you got to be particularly paying attention that the water goes all the way around. Then like your ears, this, and then your feet, and it's very like people have said in the comments, very meticulously detailed in a very structured manner that's kind of weird.
You also mentioned about this whole thing about him learning from Gabriel is also super weird, right? Like you said, the ghost is coming and like showing him how to do all these things, right?
It's so bizarre. It's so bizarre. Now we're gonna go to the next slide. The same way Gabriel taught him how to do wudu, he taught him how to pray. So one day he came in the morning and then he prayed, and then he came in the afternoon, he prayed. So he literally did 5 different prayers with Gabriel. So Gabriel was like doing these motions with him, and we just talked about earlier, but just to reaffirm that these movements are not coming from Muhammad sitting there and thinking about, oh my God, this movement makes sense. Oh, this is good. This is good. No, it's his OCD and his OCD movements coming through, and this is what Muslims are doing now. Salah, zikr, all of this is OCD of Muhammad. That's become religion. And just to give you the next is a small like time lapse video of Salah Tarawih, just to show you that this is just like you just standing there up and down, same thing over and over and over again. Let's just play this, yeah. So it just looks like, like just time lapses to show you. It's just repeating constantly the same thing. Stand, bow, stand, prostrate. Stand, bow, stand, prostrate. And when you see it in this form, you kind of realize, okay, this is bizarre. And then the fact that he thought that it was sensible to at first make it 50 times a day. The fact that it's 5 times a day on its own is quite a lot, actually. Not a lot of religions have this much. With that said, we're going to go to the next slide. This is quite a common one when I was growing up in my time as a Muslim. The miswak was very common. Muhammad in the hadith would obsessively clean his teeth. He would clean his teeth so much. Some hadith say that the surah was about to be revealed about it. He'd clean his teeth while dying. And some hadith say that his gums would be damaged or like wounded up from brushing his teeth. And yeah, he said that I would make it obligatory had I felt it wasn't be too hard for you or something. But yeah, interesting, weird. And then that also ties in with the being offensive to bad smells, the leek smell, bad breath, the leek and the onions. You kind of see these back and forth connections in his life where he projects his own delusions out, or like he'll try to hide them, but it'll leak out somehow. With that said, the next slide is repeating phrases all the time. 33 times Allahu Akbar, Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, and your Muslims are told to repeat certain phrases certain times. This is again, literally OCD, like we just said, repeating certain phrases, religious phrases, and whatnot. And then Dr. Ali Sina has a small clip that discusses the OCD of Muhammad. And I think we'll stop at that.
Another disorder that I found in him is obsessive compulsive disorder. There are many rituals in Islam, how to pray with details. 3 times, the number 3 is so important for Muhammad. Everything should be done 3 times. Wash your hand 3 times. Wash your face 3 times. And there's all these rituals, how to do these things, which has nothing to do with this spirituality or with cleanliness or communication with God. Has nothing to do with that. What's the meaning of that? Yesterday we had lunch together, and before you said, let's do some prayer, and you bowed your head and said a prayer,
Right.
coming out of your heart completely, nothing rehearsed. Well, that's a prayer. You're conversing with your God.
Right.
For Islam doesn't mean that thing. It doesn't, such a thing, concept doesn't exist at all. There, people even don't understand what they're saying, but they're repeating it constantly, ritualistically, repeating it something. This is obsessive compulsive disorder, not a prayer. All the things that Muslims are doing is rehashing the mental disorder of Muhammad. Genuflection, ruku, sujood. What are the meaning of these things? What these things have to do with God and communication with God? It must be dialogue. Like now, you and I are talking together. That's a dialogue we are having. If you are having a dialogue with your God, you don't do all these rituals. But the meaning of these rituals, why? Only obsessive compulsive disorder explains that. because people with obsessive compulsive disorder look into the forms, are fixated with rituals and with numbers, and that's what Muhammad was.
All right. So that was a very interesting conclusion to the OCD section by Dr. Alicina. We had Dr. Abbas talk about it. We know from papers that epilepsy, especially temporal epilepsy, has a high frequency of OCD. So yeah, interesting section. We figured out that Salah and a lot of the rituals and repetitions in Islam are actually the OCD of Muhammad being rehashed. But yeah, with that, Abdullah Samir, you want to take some questions, some concluding remarks?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna end it there because I'm actually really tired, to be honest. Have a bit of a headache myself. But this was a great conversation. So we'll summarize the most important points. And unfortunately, we didn't get to finish it though. The next section is going to be famous cases of epileptics that accomplished great things. So we're smashing ableist ideas that you if you have some issue like this you can't achieve great things. Well, apparently you can, and you're gonna be like blown away by some of the examples that Gondel found.
Yeah.
Yeah, go
This
ahead.
actually, this section runs from slide number 392 to 433, and it's basically case after case. And the point of this section is to completely destroy that idea and that objection to the argument that if Muhammad was an epileptic, how could he author the Quran? If Muhammad was epileptic, how could he create an empire? If Muhammad was epileptic, how could he lead an army or be making laws? We will beat that question down so badly that it's going to be embarrassing for that to be ever brought up as an objection. Why? Not only because of Muhammad, we also want to show that people with epilepsy and certain disorders like this are not dysfunctional. This idea needs to be undone. And you will see that, in fact, without some of these people and their disorders and genius that resulted from that, we wouldn't have huge amounts of literary or scientific research. It's insane. So I'm not gonna say any names yet. I'm not gonna show you who they are, but I'm just gonna give you a good idea. So what we're looking at, we got author, one of the living literary giants of our world today, has 4 honorary PhDs, and those are Doctor of Divinity. So they're a level above a normal PhD from McGill University, from University of St. Andrews and stuff. We have them on. We have poets that are living with epilepsy showing up. We have emperors, not just one, like 4 emperors, 2 presidents, 5, 6 politicians on video. It's gonna be wild. It's gonna completely change your outlook on mental illness. You have modern rappers, like very, very famous rappers, musicians, authors. But yeah, it's gonna be fascinating. Some of those in this, when they talk about their own epilepsy, they will also reference Muhammad's epilepsy being similar to their own, and how Muhammad's epilepsy would have inspired him to create his religion the same way they got inspired by their own epilepsy. Very fascinating. We're going to do one last point, refutation of Farid, knock that down, and you're going to be in for a shocker. The next section, what we'll do, the next episode, we have to make 7 episodes, right? Because number 7 gates of hell, 7 gates of heaven, 7 heaven, 7 earth, 7 skies, 7 circumambulations. So you're gonna make 7. So what we'll do is, we have only a few slides left. We're gonna do this section next time, and then after that, it'll be done in like 45 minutes or an hour. Then we'll have a discussion and calls. We'll take you guys online. We'll have your calls. We'll have a back and forth, and yeah, then we will conclude this mammoth of a project finally. But yeah, I cannot wait. I'm so excited for this last section, because it was actually like the lax section when it comes together, because you're watching this whole presentation with the question in mind. Yeah, but like epileptics or schizophrenics, yeah, they can't achieve this, they can't do this. Yeah, how did Muhammad do this? It's when you see what these people do, and when you see that they've achieved literary excellence way beyond Muhammad's wildest imaginations, that's when you realize, okay, maybe a lot of our history was actually guided and formed by these people. And that's an interesting question that's brought up by a couple of neurologists as well. If you have any concluding questions, comments, we can look at, and then we'll call it a night.
Yeah, so just to summarize what we went through today, we covered OCD, which was like right on, basically that one slide was describing Muhammad. Like it couldn't have got better than that. The violence in the Quran, the fact that from the very first revelation, like the amount of red you had on the screen, which was threats and angry comments and calling out people in his life that were bothering him without mentioning their names, although sometimes also mentioning their names, like his like Abu Lahab. And then of course the very last revelation of Quran, which was just as bad, except when he had power now, and he was basically taking his power and using it against basically a totally disproportionate sort of response to poets and blasphemers, which is an imaginary crime, but apparently to him that's the worst thing in the world because he's a prophet, right? So that's what we find, and that's another that's powerful, that gets to the point, that shows you who this guy was, connecting it back to the brain. It just makes a lot of sense. And then of course the hypergraphia, how there's examples of other people that they write and write and write, the average when we looked at that. And also the fact that OCD also tends to occur with temporal lobe epilepsy, or was it just general epilepsy? That's also very interesting as well, that overlap. So a lot of things that we covered today that was like really good. As you can see, each episode stands up independently on its own. Each one has its own points and evidences, and this one is probably, the next one will probably be the best one. And we'll have time to answer questions and stuff, and we'll see how it goes. Any last words, Abdul Gandal?
Nothing from my side. Just that I can't wait for the next one. We might do it in a week. We might do it earlier. It's the last thing because I want to get it done with, because this has been going on for a while too, these series, and it's getting exhausting. It takes a mental toll on you as well, because you have to sit down and you have to look through, and you have to sit down and think, okay, what would have Muhammad taught? What went on his head and stuff. But yeah, no, keep watching the series. If you haven't watched it yet, do watch the first 5 parts. You'll be amazed. There's just I was just shocked. Like there's so much evidence that we've made. How much hours of content, and there's every time we have like hundreds of references, like academic, Islamic videos. Like it's like at a certain point you have to ask yourself, like, it makes more sense. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, finish your point. I thought you're done.
That, like, what makes more sense? Like, do we have more evidence for his epilepsy, or do we have more evidence for his prophethood? And that's what I kept saying in the beginning. By the time we're done, the tables would have turned so much that the burden of proof literally shifts. The burden of proof shifts upon the Muslims to disprove the epilepsy thing and prove that he was getting revelations, because the evidence we've seen is quite explicit in what Muhammad had. But yep, nothing else from my side. I don't know if you have any interesting comments.
Yes, there was a question from Sarah. She said, make sure you ask Abdullah Gandal. Another hadith says that there were most revelations on the day of the Prophet's death, yet we don't know what surahs were revealed on that day.
What's funny is there's a hadith that says that Muhammad got revelation most profusely the day he died. And it also, another one says that when he got sick, he got more revelation, right? When he had fever. And this is in, I think, Bukhari or something. But the problem is, like you said, those revelations are nowhere to be found. Where are those revelations? Because the hadith says the most revelation came on his last day, the day he died. But then that's the same, or that time frame was the same time where Omar and those people are like, don't write down what Muhammad is saying. He's delirious and stuff. It also is a point against Muhammad's mental health. Like, okay, if he's getting the most at the end,
yeah, that's
where to
good.
go?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There was one more question from way long ago. I don't know if she's still here, but I did note it down because it was a good question from Mika Malak. Is it known why the hypergraphia manifests as talking/writing, specifically in rhymes?
Uh, I don't know exactly why, but like, in fact, we do get into when we get to some of the cases in the next section where a lot of poets show up. So my best bet would be, because the Wernicke's and the Broca's area are like so in close proximity to the temporal lobe. Once you stimulate the temporal lobe via a focal seizure, it could be causing that, or a generalized seizure. What ends up happening is, and this doesn't have to be right there and then during the seizure, right? When you have a seizure, your chemicals in your brain, to simply put, are out of balance. So you'll take a little while to normalize. And because of that imbalance, you can have these urges to write. And then you can also have a psychosis after a seizure where you still hear these voices and thoughts. And we also talked about lingering thoughts. For the rhyming thing, I mean, they're the two papers that I showed earlier. I would definitely say go take their links. And if you can't find them, sit down and read through them, because they do try to explain some of the neural links between the lobes, lateralization and stuff, and why it's rhymes that come up. But yeah, no, words, when I would say the way your auditory processing might work is when you do try to formulate sentences and stuff, similar words are going to pop up in your brain, and then your brain kind of has to consciously pick from that pool of words which ones to choose from. If that framework or that circuit is defective, you might have more rhymes pop up in your head. Could be that, something similar to that. Again, it's too complex to give an answer here.
Alrighty. And that's a wrap then. I think we've summarized it well. And yeah, we'll schedule this as soon as possible. I'll announce it on Twitter. Twitter is the best place to find out when the next one's coming out. And of course I will post it on YouTube. So hopefully YouTube will notify. I don't know how well YouTube notifies you guys and gals of the next episode, but we'll figure out the date and I'll post it on Facebook, Twitter, and give you guys as much notice as possible so you can show up for the final episode live. And yeah, that'll be a wrap. Thanks everyone, and thanks for your donations to those of you who donated. Thanks to everyone that supported the show, Sarah and Black Angel and others who were in the debate yesterday promoting the Epileptic Prophet, which is great. Hopefully we get more people to watch this episode of this series, and it's amazing. It's really well done. It's a lifetime of effort, in 1 or 2 years, and it's gonna have the impact of a lifetime. So we're very happy for all of the support and everyone that's sharing the content. We're doing this for the community, and this is the best it gets. So thank you guys.
Science Hafiz.
All right, good night. Good day. Bye everyone.